So, Happy New Year, first of all. A very warm welcome, and we are delighted that you're here. So, the Ain Sakri Caves near Bethlehem, a remarkably evocative image of human sexuality, and it's the oldest known sculpture depicting human intimacy. So, erotica, this is the dictionary definition from the Oxford Dictionary. So, erotic is pertaining to the passion of love. And so, erotica is matters of love, the arts and the literature. So, the Nourishment Project is about joyous curiosity and being part of something much larger than ourselves. Here are some of the references that informs this presentation. So, the economic value of erotica is no laughing matter. Viagra, since it has introduced in 1998, it has annual sales of somewhere in the range of 1.6 to $2 billion per year. And though that number seems large, it pales in comparison to that other industry related to erotica, the global pornography industry, an annual $97 billion estimation. So, some ground rules for today. This presentation avoids pornography. There is nothing included for titillation purposes. So, there is also no shunga, which are the Japanese erotic arts. And because most people are familiar with the Kama Sutra, the Indian treatise of love, that isn't been included either. So, what is this presentation going to be about? Well, for starters, the everlasting mystery of desire, which is at the heart of erotics. So, for example, what makes a certified sex symbol like Marilyn Monroe desire the playwright Norman Miller? Quite an odd couple. That undeniable magnetism that you see from Anita Ekberg as she was wading through the Trevi fountain holding a mewing kitten, that is Eros. And also the transformation of Eros into a consumer product, advertisement, because sex sells. Here is a carnal manifestation of masculine appeal. I should just make this my backdrop, but I'm not. Or androgynous appeal. The one on the bottom is actually a boy or a man, I guess. He's Damien Hurley. I think his mother is Elizabeth Hurley. And it's really hard to tell who is the beautiful of these two, him or her. And Eros, again, whether homosexual, as in this Oscar winning movie by the director Ang Lee, Brokeback Mountain, or heterosexual, director Ang Lee again. It's the title's very telling, good, quite a good warning, lust, caution, because it's almost like soft porn, but it's not. It's a wonderfully intimate tale of espionage set in China during Japanese occupation. It's a brilliant, brilliant movie. And even in the plays, this is the one from the, this is my favorite. Not, I mean, it was a play and it's also a movie, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. Who doesn't like Paul Newman? If you're on a hot tin roof, you jump. And the other play that goes across age, across culture, and this is from the National Theatre, Anthony and Cleopatra. And Eros in erotica is depicted also, very well depicted, in paintings. The direct look of Manet's mistress Olympia had caused quite a scandal during its times. And flowers are sexualized. What she covers with her left hand is symbolized through the pink flower tucked by her ear. And the bouquet that her maid is holding signifies an offering as well, because the analogy is a very wide one. In Japan, geishas worked in what's known as hanamachi, which are the flower towns. And in China, brothels were euphemistically known as flower markets. And so flowers are found in photography as well, especially those by the photographer Robert Mapplethorpe. Mapplethorpe carves with light and contrasts, and here the fleshy petals suggest the texture of human skin. The pistils peeping between petals suggest rather unchaste lilies. I think it was John Updike who had said inner petals drenched with helpless nectar. Quite suggestive of sexual organs. Mapletop's photography, and he did tons of flowers, orchids, and all of it. They capture the erotic hunch and the carnal pulse, vibrating in every nerve, in every hairy bud of the orchids. The Japanese photographer Nobuyoshi Araki, his anthurium is a rather serene and subversive magnetic flower, as he presents it. But perhaps no artist has invested flowers with as much eroticism as Georgia O'Keeffe. And as far as the gardens of earthly delight is concerned, this is the erotic side of peppers. Talk about hot. One sees the appeal of vegetarianism when you see something like this. So the photographer Edward Weston captured their curving surfaces with almost as much attention as other photographers pay to human nudes. So let's begin at Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, the first empire. I want to thank our program collaborator, the Oriental Institute, for access to archives. This very recognizable form, a clay tablet, is representing the union of man and woman. The Mesopotamian civilization occupies the area which we now recognize as Syria and Iraq. It is the oldest surviving literary work from there, the Epic of Gilgamesh. It was composed nearly 4,000 years ago, and no one actually knows who wrote it or why, or what the intended audience was. It was preserved in clay tablets around 1200 BCE, BCE being before current era, in the earliest known alphabet known as cuneiform script. And so the epic tells the story of a king, Gilgamesh, whose mother is a goddess. He rules the city of Uruk, but he is lustful and tyrannical, and he sees and violates brides on their wedding day. So as a result, the gods create a wild man named Enkidu, whom you see on the right side relief, the one with the horns on the head. So Enkidu has been created to stop Gilgamesh from oppressing his people. Now, after the wild man Enkidu has been civilized by this woman called Shamhat, he meets Gilgamesh. So now Gilgamesh and Enkidu are equally matched in strength. And after the initial fight, when they realize they've met their match, they become friends. They actually become lovers and embark on lots of heroic adventures together. And in one such quest, Enkidu dies, and Gilgamesh fails to understand why this happened, and he mourns this death bitterly. So he then sets off to discover the secret of eternal life. Gilgamesh is going to fail every quest, and he returns to Uruk, having learned that though he is mighty and famous, he too will die like everyone else. I marvel at the audacity of whomever did this story. Can you imagine this day and age, a story written where the hero completely fails everything, and yet he's still a hero? And the story is very relevant. The message is the same message that one gets from Max Ehrmann's Desiderata poem, effectively being, yeah, the world has drudgery and it's got broken dreams, but it is still a beautiful, beautiful world. The message is, be cheerful, strive to be happy. It's very applicable in our times, and it's actually applicable in all times because happiness is a choice. But what I find also interesting is if you look at the picture on the right, or the relief on the right, when I saw that picture, doesn't the relief remind you of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are? A king and his wild man. Anyway, back to the story. When first encountered, Enkidu, we find him as a child of nature, a complete wild man, more animal than human. And it is the female Shamhat. This is just a depiction. I don't know if these are the real people, but this is a clay tablet that I had found. So Shamhat is a priestess who serves the goddess Ishtar. She's the Babylonian, Mesopotamian goddess, goddess of war and sexual love. So Shamhat is the one who civilizes the wild man through 7 days of lovemaking. She teaches him about eating cooked food, about wearing clothes. And so Enkidu's transformation, his civilization, is due to woman through eros, love. It is woman and sexuality, erotica, that is the potent force that civilizes man, that distinguishes man from beasts. Erotica and anything to do with eros humanizes. Now, that's quite a different story from the Bible, isn't it? Which is rather ironic because the story of Noah and the flood and the ark are first found in the Epic of Gilgamesh. It is effectively, the Epic of Gilgamesh is almost the blueprint of many, many stories that follow henceforth. But what a marked difference to the potency of sexuality. In Gilgamesh, woman and sexuality are the entry points into civilization, into the human paradise. Whereas in Christianity, Book of Genesis, for example, sexuality signals condemnation. And so Adam, and especially Eve, has been vilified. Further on, as we go on the stories from Christianity, the stories of Salome and the beheading of John the Baptist, here Moreau paints the story with an oriental exoticism, and Salome is presented as a seductress, which, according to the story, she is not. She was a child. And Aubrey Beardsley, he goes even further, but then again, Aubrey Beardsley, I think he was known as the most monstrous of orchids. He introduces necrophilia and androgyny. And so all problems pivot on lust, erotica. But this condemning view of erotica is decidedly a Western perspective. So Egyptians had their humorous views on sex. This is the Turin erotic papyrus. It is found and tattered in pieces. So I'm going to zoom in on a point so that you know what you're looking at. How shall I say it politely? She's being helpful, lending a helping hand, shall we say. And so from the Egyptians, we move on to the pre-Christian Greeks. And the painting here from Pompeii, what it is depicting is the background story and context is the god of love, the Greek god of love, Eros. He had shot his father Ares with the arrows of love, making Ares fall in love with another woman. Now, Eros's mother, Aphrodite, would not be willing to forgive this mistake. And so the picture is showing the Greek goddess of persuasion, Pytho. What she's doing is bringing Eros to his mother, Aphrodite, by holding Eros by his hand as if to encourage him not to be afraid of the punishment that awaits him. And sitting on the rock, very severe, is the goddess of love herself, Eros's mother, Aphrodite. Behind her, one sees Eros, Eros's little brother. So Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and Ares, the god of war, are the parents of both Eros and Anti-Eros. So Eros was their older child. And when he was growing up, the parents realized the boy wasn't growing up, he wasn't maturing. And so they realized they needed to provide a little brother for him. And that's when they generated Anti-Eros. The idea being for love to grow, it needs to be reciprocated. It needs awareness. So the two brothers were inseparable because love, in order to grow, needs reciprocation. So Eros ignites passion and the search for beauty, and Anti-Eros protects when that love is matched. And so it's a very harmonizing duality that love needs to be reciprocated to grow. And those who've been to London, you've likely encountered Anti-Eros. In Piccadilly Circus Square, for example, it's the Shaftesbury Memorial Fountain. And when it was unveiled in 1893, the nude boy on top was considered hideous, indecent, and honestly ludicrous, which is kind of amusing because Victorian England is rather interesting. because decades earlier, in around 1865, in the British Museum, they had officially created what's called the secretum. It was also known as the Cupboard 55, which is where they housed all sorts of antiquities deemed too explicit for the general public, especially women and children. Uh, in short, it was pretty much a porn closet. Only select, elite, educated gentlemen were granted access. And so, for example, what things that you might find in there are things such as this Tara statue. So, this Tara statue is clearly on display now, but back then, her naked, fully developed upper body and the near diaphanous lower body draping was considered too risque, even for the progressive Victorians. But a millennia ago, no one in Southeast Asia, from where these statues come, batted an eye at these figures or others much more explicit about Eros, such as this one. This one is still not on display at the museum, but they have long been and remain in public view on temples throughout Asia, as will be seen later. So this was also part of the secretum. This is swan from Zeus impregnating Leda. So Leda later gave, I guess the right term is not birth, she hatched eggs from which comes out, for example, Helen of Troy and Clytemnestra, among with other people. Helen of Troy and Clytemnestra is obviously central figures in the story of Homer's Iliad. Another object from the secretum is this figure of Pan with a she-goat. This one is still not on public display. But there is a very long, odd history of goats and erotics. And as there are many book lovers in this audience, it is appropriate for me to recommend this book, Charlatan. It is a real life story about a 20th century American con man, this man named Brinkley. And how shall I put it politely? He was a goat gland surgeon. So these are days before Viagra. And it has the most bizarre contribution to the development of the American Medical Association. Because of the stuff that Brinkley did, they needed to implement strict regulations of what they passed, one could and could not do. In pun completely implied, this book is absolutely nuts. Please read it. It's funny and just bizarre. But going back to the British Museum secretum, here is those very recognizable red and black vases, the Greek vases, showing, to me, it looks like a woman who's admiring her statues of erection in the garden, as one might admire the garden gnome statues you sometimes see. But back then, these phalluses were part of the fertility symbol, also for good luck. And herms, which is being depicted here, herms were back then in the antiquities boundary markers or signposts. And often the head on top of the herm was that of the Greek god Hermes. And the symbol for Hermes was a phallus. I want someone to go tell the French luxury brand, you know, you should really update and authenticate your brand. Can you imagine if you bought purses with that sign? That would go really well. Well, anyway, the Greeks influenced the Romans, and many such pictures and paintings are found in the ruins of Pompeii. And a lot of them are preserved in the Erotic Museum in Naples. It's called the Secret Museum. So with the Greeks and the Romans, because the Greeks influenced the Romans, as I had just said, embedded in many of the early Renaissance artwork, like this one of Botticelli's, is Neoplatonic thought. That contemplation of physical beauty allows the mind to better understand spiritual beauty. And so the Roman concept of love is very well captured in Botticelli's Birth of Venus. And so origin stories, historically, or mythologically anyway, Kronos, the god, had cut off the genitals of his father Uranus and thrown them into the ocean. And then from the blood and the semen from the cut off genitals had created foam. And from foam, the Greek word for foam is aphros. From the foam comes Aphrodite. scintillating origin stories, aren't there? There is also another origin story with Aphrodite. If you go back very far during the Babylonian times, it is said that perhaps Aphrodite is a reconstruction of that original Babylonian goddess Ishtar. So there are many different ways of going about it. But when you come to the painting here, what it is showing is Aphrodite and her creation. And so naked female statues are very rare in Greek. And so this is one of the last times that Venus ever appears absolutely naked. Because when she steps foot on land, she is then forever clothed. So Botticelli based her face on his real life love, but the body is based on a statue that was very well known during his time, the Venus de Medici. This is a first century BCE, by the way, so before current era, marble copy of an earlier bronze. And I'm going to go back. So this same pose is the one that you see that Botticelli had copied. He had just put his lover's face on it. The goddess here is depicted in a fugitive, momentary pose, as if she's surprised in the act of, emerging from the sea. Ooh, where are my clothes? But if you go to the Uffizi, this Aphrodite is a very terrible flirt. Though completely naked, she only half hides her breast in private. So if you walk around her, she gives you a pretty racy view from all sides. And though women aren't often portrayed in Greek sculptures, it's hard, really difficult not to see an intensely sexual element to some of their very sensuous sculptures of women. The Nereids, and this is obviously in the British Museum, are sea nymphs. So there were 12 of them, and I just zoomed in on one of them, the picture on the right. She appears to be sprinting into a headlong gale, her thin gown plastered against her breasts by the wind and the rain. So I always smile thinking this is effectively the world's first wet t-shirt contest. But the Greeks' love of the naked male form is very well established. And I don't know what happens between the 6th century BCE to the 5th century BCE, because in those 100 years, Greek statues go from clunky statues to just eye-wateringly beautiful. And so 5th century BCE Greek sculptures are a wonder. Few things are as magnificent as this Elissos, which is part of the Elgin marbles. Elissos is named after the river that still flows through Athens, and it is his cloak that is sculpted to look dripping wet. So the oozing, flowing, swerving, unpredictable lines of 5th century Athenian chiton drapery have been compared to liquid chocolate in their natural liquid movement. I salivate over this one. This is the picture on my phone. I just love this statue. And it is said that Michelangelo salivated over this statue, the Belvedere torso, which is in the Vatican. To him, this was the carnal manifestation of the erotic sentiment, because Michelangelo couldn't stop studying it. He drew it incessantly. And one recognizes it in this form, the creation of Adam. If you look beyond Adam's abs there lies Adam, awaiting animation. But if you really zoom in and look, he's not really reaching out to touch the rejuvenating power of God, is he? What he's actually doing is gazing intently at the one who gazes back at him. I'm going to point. What Adam is looking at to become alive is at Eve. She's the one who gazes right back at him. Just, I imagine, Shamhat bringing into life, into civilization, Enkidu. So we move to paintings because they're a wonderful way from history to get this concept of Eros. So this is Peter Paul Rubens' Angelica and the Hermit. This is part of Canto 8 of the opera Orlando Furioso. So Haymarket Opera is a curriculum collaborator of the Nourishment Projects. And they will be performing Orlando Furioso in the fall. Now, I love Haymarket Opera, and I recommend them unabashedly in anything that they do. I hope you consider them when fall comes around. I'm sure it'll be wonderful. So, to this painting, this hermit has struggled for years with his temptation. He finds it very, very difficult to be celibate. And so, Angelica represents to the hermit Eros, his one chance of sexual experience. So he casts her into a hypnotic slumber, and we see the hermit creeping up to her in the darkness to pull off the sheet and take advantage of her. There you see on the top right the devil lifting up the cushion, symbolically presenting Angelica to the hermit. It is this promised land, Eros, the heaven of other men. That heaven the hermit cannot enter because the hermit turns out to be impotent and thereby undercutting the puritanical fear of temptation. You know, on a side note, as I was preparing these presentation, I was scanning through pictures and I had this up on my screen. My husband was walking by. He tells me, "Don't expect me to be waiting for you lying like this." I was like, "Idiot, shut up." He just distracts my work. But anyway, Rembrandt. So we move on to the picture of Rembrandt, Bathsheba at her bath. So the story is that King David had spied her at her bath, fell in love with her, and had forced himself on her. This is not that scene. So what we are encountering is afterwards, when she's already pregnant with David's child. So she appears to us from this mysterious blackness. She's lost in her thoughts and dominates our sensibilities, because what Rembrandt does is he casts us, the audience, as King David, a lustful viewer, spying on her at her bath. She's holding in her hand a letter from King David because he has asked her to marry him because he wants to make things all right. Here is a woman experiencing to the full what it means to be tempted. She's holding in her hand the fragile letter of temptation, and that indescribable look on her face, half sad, half soft. Her Hittite maid sits drying her foot, and she's probably representing her adoring husband Uriah, who we know will be killed in the war that King David has sent him off to. And so, will she choose King David? These morally complex erotic temptations, the complexity of being human, of making lonely choices, of human vulnerability and human strength. Botticelli again, and what this depicts is after a night of lovemaking, Mars, the god of war, is completely worn out. It's obviously an allegory of love being more powerful than war. There's also a great deal of potential humor in this painting. He is utterly drained and can't even hear the satyrs making noises right inside his ear, while the others steal his lance and armor. It's love strips war's armors completely off. So there lies Mars in a brutish slumber, whereas Aphrodite, she's cool as a cucumber, not a hair out of place. She almost has this bored look. Is this all? When I see this, this reminds me of Mark Twain's Letters from the Earth. Here is an excerpt. I did not write this. This is really Mark Twain. I'll read it out to you. Read along. The law of God, as quite plainly expressed in woman's construction, is this: there shall be no limit upon your intercourse with the other sex sexually at any time of life. During 23 days of every month, from very young till she dies of old age, she is ready for action and competent. Those are his highlights, not mine. As competent as the candlestick to receive the candle. Competent every day, competent every night. Also, she wants that candle, yearns for it, longs for it, hankers after it, as commanded by the law of God in her heart. But man is only briefly competent. He is competent from the age of 16 or 17, thenceforth for 35 years. After 50, his performance is of poor quality. The intervals between are wide, and its satisfaction of no great value to either party, whereas his great grandmother is as good as new. There is nothing the matter with her plant. Her candlestick is as firm as ever, whereas his candle is increasingly softened and weakened by the weather of age as the years go by, until at last it can no longer stand and is mournfully laid to rest in the hope of a blessed resurrection, which is never to come. Now, obviously, Mark Twain wrote this before Viagra came along, because everything is very different now. Do read the book, Letters from the Earth. It's wonderful. But he's not the only surprising writer of erotica. We also have Emily Dickinson. So this is one of many she's written. I just chose some for today. Wild nights, were I with thee. Wild nights should be our luxury. Futile the winds to a heart in port. Done with the compass, done with the chart. Rowing in Eden, at sea, might I but more tonight in thee. That's quite a plea, because Eden reappears. So this is another poem by Dickinson. Come slowly, Eden, lips unused to thee, bashful, sip thy jessamines as the fainting bee. Reaching late his flower, round her chamber hums, counts his nectars, enters, and is lost in balms. The message isn't lost on anyone. And then once again, it's that meeting, that line from John Updike, inner petals drenched with helpless nectar. One more example of American sensuality is Walt Whitman. This is just one of his stanzas from So Long. This is no book. Who touches this touches a man. Is it night? Are we here together alone? It is I you hold, and who holds you? I spring from the pages into your arms. Another poem, a poet who expresses very similar sentiments, is John Donne, the converted Anglican dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. His Meditation 16 contains phrases that are quite well known to many of us. So, for example, he's the one who had written No Man is an Island, and then also For Whom the Bell Tolls. So this is one of his condensed version of his poem, To His Mistress Going to Bed. It's rather a long poem. I'm just taking a short stanza from there. Now off with those shoes, and then safely tread in this love's hallowed temple, this soft bed. License my roving hands and let them go, before, behind, between, above, and below. Oh, my America, my newfound land. So this America that he writes about, it wasn't he was being a colonial patriot. It was the name of his mistress, America. And just one example of the work of the Japanese poet Izumi Shikibu. She's the one who had written The Tale of Genji. It's a classic. Eros through the eyes of a woman. The fireflies of this marsh seem like sparks that rise from my body's longing. You know, her work and others like her, like Ono no Komachi, they are worth investigating. So Ono no Komachi, she's also a great poet. She has written stuff like, which one did she write? Yeah. Like a ripple that chases the slightest caress of a breeze. is that how you want me to follow you? Can you imagine writing that? Yeah, write like that. I'll follow you unabashedly. In India, the revered poet Jayadeva writes of the god Krishna, the blue god you might have seen in paintings, and of his Krishna's beloved Radha. So Radha was always the older married woman. So the poet Jayadeva applies metaphor upon metaphor to create a cosmic drama of union. And the imagery is loaded with flora and fauna. So in Indian mindset, the writers of the poet, erotic is sacred. It is the adornment of the universe with fertility. And so pleasure in the Indian mindset of the writers of India is the taste of love. Passion is the taste for love. And so the Indian Sanskrit term ras, which is also pronounced rasa, it is both the source of pleasure and the cause of passion. And so poems such as these, many of these Sanskrit poems, Jayadeva, Kalidas, all of them, and more importantly, the accompanying music, because music is essential to this idea of erotica, not just for Indian, but across the genre. The reason it's not included here is one, time and limitations. You really can't play really beautiful music across the Zoom, or I certainly don't know how to do it. And so these writings is rasamritam, which means the elixir of pleasure and passion. So here are some examples. In the references, there was something called archive.net or archive.org. If any of you want to find old archives, they have archives from around the world. It's a wonderful free source. It's great. If you want to read snippets of any of this, they have uploaded everything in its entirety on the internet. It's a blessing. So here we go. It starts off in one of the first ones. It says, I mutter your name like a devotional activity, just as a devotee invokes the name of his Lord. Behold the sexualization of the devotional, the sanctification of the erotic. So the first one I'm going to read is Memories from Krishna about Radha. And these are done in Sanskrit. The couplets, the writing, it's melodious, but we are limited to translations. I'm sure you'll get the point. I cannot forget you, clinging to my limbs, when your body burned with the fire of love's violent passion, your body weak with fatigue, beads of sweat strewn thick like pearls from your rhythmic swinging. As if to keep between us the secret of our guilt, your arms clung like vines to my neck. Sounds you uttered then without meaning, yet not meaningless. My heartbeat now echoes them. And here is a sample of Radha's memory of Krishna, because it's a very long poem. In my heart, I hold you at dawn, startled into waking, as I touch you slowly. I meditate on you, arching your back until the beauty line of hair on your waist appears as you raise your arms to stretch your body. I remember your fevers of awakened passion, tremulous, capricious, graceful, quiet, slow, excited, and then finally wildly wanton in drunken abandonment. I see the face of my love, clearly fixed before me, lips wounded by my teeth, trembling eyes gracefully closing, love's glow gleaming like clear moonlight. The poem's lyricism have the rounded loveliness of dewdrops on lotus leaves. And this Kangra painting hums with the beauty of the poem of Gita Govinda. All of this is available through archives.org or net. I forgot what it is. It's in the reference. And the beauty of this is also similar beauty can be seen in the wall paintings in the Ajanta caves in India. These are 6th century paintings. So the Holy Trinity, which is the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost equivalent in the Hindu Trinity, is Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the protector, and Shiva, the destroyer. And the Hinduism has its accompanying tenets of dharma, which is the performance of moral obligations, artha, earning an honest livelihood, and kama, realization of legitimate desires. So the three tenets are more ethics, morality, earning a living, because it's a very practical religion, and kama, love. And so this last part, kama, the desire and the eros, is as essential as the other two. Hindu priests are not celibate. They're pretty much required to be married householders who have children. And so inside such caves, that was Ajanta and this is Ellora, inside such caves, and by the way, these are the caves that inspired the Dunhuang caves that we learned about of the Silk Roads, because these were all monasteries, viraha. These are where they learned of the scriptures. And it's this word viraha that is influenced the word in that we get Bukhara in by Afghanistan, because those were all Buddhist strongholds in the early millennia. So these caves are full of statues of Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain deities. One scene depicts the marriage of Lord Shiva to his consort Parvati. So generally, Shiva is an ascetic, but when he is married, Shiva becomes a devoted husband. And the illustration that had sent for this presentation is associated with the physical union between Shiva and Parvati. And in this, Shiva shows himself as Ardhanariswara, the inseparable unity, all male, all female. So the reality is each of us is born of a mother, female, and a father, male. And so we are all a harmony of male and female energies. So as far as this is concerned, using the symbol of Shiva and Parvati, what it is saying is that in the physical union of deep love, at the meeting, merging, and becoming one of primordial energies, at that point of orgasm, no self exists. It is the transcendence that religion speaks of. So it's absolute selflessness. So this form, Ardhanariswara, indicates that the male and the female are completely merged into one, and that union is an orchestration of energies. So metaphysically, what it is saying is that the union of substance and energy is at the source of all creation. And this is the basis of Tantra. I think most commonly people associate the musicians sting with Tantra and, this tantric sex practices. So it's that same Tantra. So what it is saying, the basic of Tantra is the prefix tan, it means to weave, and the suffix tra means doctrine. So if you've heard the term mantra, man is mind. So mantra is the doctrine that helps you discipline your mind. So Tantra, what it is meaning is that it's all energies woven together, woven into one. So there's no duality. So aspects of this show up in the Buddhist descriptions of depictions of Yabyum, which is on the right. Buddhism comes from Hinduism, so there are lots of overlapping belief systems that come over. There's some major differences, but there are enough that are similar. So what it is showing is that the divisions between material and energy is utterly superfluous, because in reality, everything is one. And it's so striking. It is the same message that comes from quantum physics, that all of matter is nothing more than bundles of energy held together. So what this is doing in the religious aspects, Yab Yum, Ardhanariswara, all of this, what it shows is that it's a representation of God as an unfolding creative process. It is the spirituality of Eros, of love, that creation expands without limit. It is the unlimited creation in space and time. It is utterly eternal. And the most popular form of Shiva, he is worshipped in this form. On the left, many of you have been to India and you've seen this. It is in the form of a lingam, which is an erect phallus, and it is mounted on a base, which represents the female vulva, which is the yoni. And so during worship, which I'm showing you the temple worships in the right, this is happening in temples all through India. Milk is being poured on the phallus. I mean, the imagery is just obvious what they're depicting. So symbolically, what it is showing is the universe is a womb that has been impregnated by male energy, which is the phallus that is being shown. So the placing of the lingam, which is the phallus, on the yoni, which is the vulva, it is effectively symbolizing generative power. It is the ongoing erotic play of the universe, creation. So the whole world is an impregnation. It is the active female energy of creation harmonized with the male. There is no competition. Shivling, which is a glacier, a mountain in the Himalayas. So you can imagine as the water melts, it fertilizes the entire Indian subcontinent. And this is very, very accepted throughout India. This is how it's worshipped, all temples throughout India. So imagine a country of a billion people. They're all worshipping the power of creation. So erotic desire is at the heart of creation. These are extremely devout people. So in Tanjore, this Brihadishvara temple, there are 1,000 lingams. The worship of creation, it is the sacredness of Eros. In the South Indian state of Karnataka, we have what is called the Sahasra Linga. So Sahasra means 1,000. So 1,000 lingams are carved into the bedrock right there. This animal, the bull, is the consort of Shiva. Most of the Hindu deities have a accompanying animal. And in monsoon, the symbolic fertility, gushing of energy is the life-giving source of water. The same concept is found in Cambodia, which used to be a Hindu stronghold. That is why you have the Hindu Angkor Wat temples in Cambodia. So lingams, I'm going to point because with the water gushing, it's all these. There's 1,000 lingams embedded into the bedrock there as well. And so when the water flows over these lingams, it will reach the paddy fields, the rice fields, and make them fertile. Indonesia, again, it's the same symbol of male and female union. In this Japanese Hindu temple, and it's built around the theme of sex and birth. So I'm going to point with the marker. Here is represented the womb. And on top of this Javanese Hindu temple was a giant phallus, which now resides in the National Museum of Indonesia. The temple is adorned with erotic sculpture and very recognizable Hindu deities. It is an homage to the temples of India, such as the famous Khajuraho temples. So the Khajuraho temples, there are only about 22 remaining now. Originally, there were 85 of them. And they were built during the 10th through 12th centuries and immortalized in stone at Khajuraho are virile men and voluptuous women cavorting, copulating in the most intimate and erotic of postures. No such postures, none of these reliefs are inside the temple. They're all outside. But you must go through them to get to the inner sanctum. And so these sinuous, twisting forms, both human and divine, throb with life. Because what they're showing is that the religion is an initiation into the inwardness. When you look within, from there you expand universally out. You will have to go through this just like the priests do to really transcend all this and get to what's really important. And this worship of the erotic is not limited to Asia alone. So the Museo Larco in Lima, Peru, this is pre-Columbian. In the context of today's presentation, pre-Columbian being that this is before Spain imposed Christianity on the native people there. Ritualized sex objects are found even in their funeral potteries. So this erotica symbolizes that the life force is going to be carried over in the afterlife through these objects. So when you're carrying this life force, this erotica into the afterlife, you are transcending death. So human copulation and animals, it is the power of creation in all forms. And what I found stunning, 1250 BCE from Peru, similar to the message from the Shivalingam, here is the pre-Columbian symbolic Mother Earth awaiting the sexual potency of the male energy. And so in most pre-Christian cultures, spanning millennia, the erotic is a sacred life force that adorns the universe with fertility. I find it fascinating that we, this earth, this planet, all planets, galaxies, they circle, they dance through time and space in an eternal rhythm of pleasure. It is really an erotic play of the universe. I hope you have enjoyed the presentation. And 2 weeks from now, hosted by the Women's Athletic Club, the Gardens Cultivating series is continuing, presented by the Nourishment Project. On January 28th, the focus is the Japanese gardens. And the monthly series from the Nourishment Project is going to be next month, February, it's on contracts, beautiful deeds, the visual poetry of contracts. The picture on the left depicts a ketubah, which I recently learned are these utterly gorgeous wedding document contracts from the Jewish traditions. I'm very delighted that William Gross is here. I had been to one of his presentations in November, and I was stunned to discover this. And so next month, the whole presentation is going to be on contracts. I do hope you will consider joining us. Information about it can be found in the nourishmentprojects.com. And more than anything else, I am very grateful for your time and I wish you joy. I'm going to stop sharing now.